I thought I had the perfect marriage, till I discovered my son's father wasn't my husband. It was his younger brother. And the worst part, everyone in the family knew except me. My name is Sarah, and up until 3 years ago, I thought I was living the perfect life. I was 32, married to David for 8 years, and we had just welcomed our beautiful son, Mason, into the world. On paper, everything looked flawless. We had the suburban house with the white picket fence, 2 cars in the driveway, and what everyone called a picture-perfect marriage. David and I met when I was 24, working as a marketing coordinator at a small firm downtown. He was 28, already making good money in construction management, and had this confident, protective energy that drew me in immediately. Our first date was at this tiny Italian restaurant where the waiter spilled wine all over David's shirt. And instead of getting angry, he laughed so hard that I knew right then this was my person. We moved in together after dating for 1.5 years. David was everything I thought I wanted in a husband: stable, hardworking, family-oriented. He talked about wanting kids from early on, which aligned perfectly with my dreams of being a mom. His family welcomed me with open arms, especially his parents, who treated me like the daughter they never had. But it was David's younger brother, Jake, who became one of my closest friends in the family. Jake was 25 when David and I got married, still figuring out his life, hopping between jobs and relationships. Where David was steady and predictable, Jake was spontaneous and artistic. He played guitar, wrote poetry, and had this infectious laugh that could light up any room. David often traveled for work, sometimes for weeks at a time, overseeing construction projects across the state. During those lonely stretches, Jake would stop by to check on me, help with yard work, or just hang out and watch movies. It became our routine. David appreciated that his brother was looking out for me, and I appreciated having someone to talk to who understood the family dynamics. Jake and I had this easy friendship that I treasured. We'd spend hours talking about everything: his dreams of maybe becoming a music teacher, my frustrations with my job, family gossip, life philosophy. He was like the brother I never had, and I was probably the first woman in his life who was untrying to date him or fix him. When David and I decided to start trying for a baby after 5 years of marriage, Jake was one of the first people we told. He was so excited about becoming an uncle, already making jokes about teaching his future nephew or niece to play guitar behind David's back. Those were happy times, full of hope and anticipation. The pregnancy journey wasn't easy for us. It took 2 years of trying, and I had 1 miscarriage along the way that devastated both David and me. Jake was incredible during that dark period, bringing me soup when David was traveling, sitting with me when I needed to cry, never making me feel like I was being overdramatic about the loss. When I finally got pregnant with Mason, everyone was over the moon. David was traveling less, trying to be more present, but work still demanded a lot of his time. Jake continued being my emotional support system, driving me to doctor appointments when David couldn't make it, helping me set up the nursery, and just being there through all the pregnancy hormones and anxiety. Looking back now, I can see moments that should have been red flags, but at the time everything felt innocent and familial. The way Jake would linger a little too long during our hugs, how he always found reasons to touch my hand or shoulder when we talked, the intensity in his eyes sometimes when he looked at me, especially during those vulnerable moments when I was sharing my fears about motherhood or my occasional loneliness in my marriage. But I pushed those observations aside. Jake was David's little brother. He was my friend. I was pregnant and probably reading too much into normal friendly affection. David trusted us completely. He never showed even a hint of jealousy or concern about the time Jake and I spent together. If my own husband wasn't worried, why should I be? Mason was born on a snowy February morning after 12 hours of labor. David was there, holding my hand, crying when our son took his first breath. Jake showed up at the hospital that evening with flowers and the biggest smile I'd ever seen on his face. He held Mason so gently, tears streaming down his cheeks, whispering something I couldn't hear. "He's perfect," Jake said, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "He looks just perfect." David was beaming with pride, taking pictures, calling his parents, completely absorbed in new father bliss. I was exhausted but happy, surrounded by the 2 most important men in my life, holding my beautiful baby boy. For those first few months, everything felt magical. David stepped up as a father in ways that made me fall in love with him all over again. Jake was the doting uncle, coming over constantly to help with feedings and diaper changes. My in-laws were thrilled grandparents, and my own parents visited regularly. Mason was such a good baby, rarely fussy, sleeping well, hitting all his developmental milestones. Everyone commented on how alert and expressive his eyes were, how he seemed to study everyone's faces with unusual intensity for such a young baby. Life felt complete. I had everything I'd ever wanted: a loving husband, a healthy baby, a supportive extended family, and financial security.
Oh.
I thought our foundation was unshakable. I had no idea that in just 2.5 years, everything I believed about my life would crumble in a single afternoon, leaving me to question not just my marriage, but my entire sense of reality and trust. The first crack in my perfect world appeared when Mason turned 2. It was subtle at first, just little comments here and there that I initially brushed off as innocent observations. Wow, Mason really doesn't look like David at all, does he? My neighbor Mrs. Chen mentioned one afternoon as we watched our toddlers play in the backyard. I mean, he's beautiful, but I don't see any resemblance. I laughed it off. He's still young. Features changed so much in the first few years, but that comment stuck with me. That night I found myself staring at Mason as he slept, really studying his face for the first time in months. Mrs. Chen was right. He didn't look like David. Mason had dark, wavy hair, while both David and I had straight, light brown hair. His eyes were a striking hazel green, almost amber in certain light, while David's were blue and mine were brown. His nose was different too, more angular with a slight upturn that neither David nor I possessed. I told myself genetics were complicated. Maybe he got recessive traits from grandparents. Maybe he'd grow into looking more like us. But a tiny seed of unease had been planted. The comments kept coming, though. At Mason's second birthday party, David's aunt pulled me aside. "He's such a beautiful boy, Sarah, but goodness, he looks nothing like your side or David's side of the family. Are you sure there isn't some mailman joke we should be making?" She laughed, but her eyes were searching my face for a reaction. I forced a smile and changed the subject. But inside, my stomach was churning. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up after the party, I overheard David's parents talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. Don't you think it's odd?" his mother was saying. "I mean, I love that little boy to pieces, but Linda," David's father interrupted. "It's not our place to say anything." My blood ran cold. I stood frozen behind the partially closed door, straining to hear more, but they'd moved on to discussing the weather. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David snored beside me. What weren't people saying? What did everyone see that I was missing? Or worse, what did they know that I didn't? I started paying closer attention to interactions between family members. There were looks exchanged that I'd never noticed before, conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, a general awkwardness that seemed to hover around discussions about Mason's appearance or personality traits. The breaking point came during a family barbecue in late summer. Mason was playing in the sprinkler with his cousins when Jake arrived, fresh from his job at the music store, where he'd finally found steady work. As soon as Mason saw his uncle, he ran over, soaking wet, arms outstretched. "Uncle Jake? Uncle Jake?" Mason squealed with pure joy. Jake scooped him up, spinning him around, both of them laughing. Something about that moment, the way they moved together, the identical crinkles around their eyes when they smiled, the same animated hand gestures, hit me like a physical blow. I looked around and caught my mother-in-law watching the scene with an expression of profound sadness mixed with guilt. Our eyes met for just a second before she quickly looked away, but that glance told me everything I needed to know. She knew something. They all knew something. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I cornered David in our bedroom. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." David looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised. "Okay, what's going on? You've been weird all day." "People keep commenting on how Mason doesn't look like us, like a lot of people. And your family has been acting strange lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" David's expression shifted slightly, just a flicker of something that might have been panic before he composed himself. "Sarah, what are you suggesting? That's crazy. Mason is our son. People see what they want to see. But David, look at him. Really look at him. When's the last time you actually studied his face?" "I look at my son every day," David said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "I can't believe you're even having these thoughts. This is insane." But I could see it in his eyes now. Doubt. fear, maybe even guilt. Has anyone in your family said anything to you? Your mom, your dad, anyone? No, Sarah, you're being paranoid. Maybe you should talk to someone about these thoughts you're having. Postpartum depression can last longer than people think. The fact that he was trying to gaslight me into thinking this was a mental health issue, rather than addressing my legitimate concerns, made me even more suspicious. The David I married would have sat down with me, talked through my worries, maybe even suggested we look through baby photos together to identify family resemblances I might be missing. Instead, he was deflecting and dismissing, which only reinforced my growing certainty that something was very, very wrong. Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-aware of every interaction. Jake's visits, which had decreased somewhat since Mason's birth, now seemed loaded with significance. The way Jake looked at Mason, was that normal uncle affection, or something deeper? The way Mason lit up around Jake more than anyone else, including David, I started taking mental notes. Mason had Jake's exact smile, the same dimple in his left cheek, the same habit of tilting his head when he was thinking. Even some of his expressions and mannerisms seemed to mirror Jake's rather than David's. One afternoon, while Mason napped and David was at work, I sat at my kitchen table and really let myself think the unthinkable thought that had been circling my mind for weeks. What if David wasn't Mason's father? What if Jake was? The thought consumed me for weeks. I'd find myself staring at Mason during bath time, looking for any trace of David's features and finding none. I'd watch home videos from when Mason was a newborn, analyzing every angle of his tiny face. I even dug out old photo albums, comparing baby pictures of David and Jake, searching for resemblances that might explain away my growing suspicions. But every comparison only made things worse. Baby Jake had the same distinctive ears as Mason, the same eye shape, the same little cowlick that made their hair stick up in the back. I was losing sleep, barely eating, going through the motions of daily life, while this terrible possibility ate away at my sanity. David noticed my distraction, but attributed it to work stress. He'd suggest date nights or weekend getaways, trying to reconnect, having no idea that I was questioning the very foundation of our marriage. The final straw came during a casual conversation with my sister Emma over coffee. She was visiting for the weekend, playing with Mason in our living room while we caught up. "God, he's gotten so big," Emma said, watching Mason stack blocks with intense concentration. "You know, I was looking through Mom's old photo albums last week, trying to find pictures for her 70th birthday slideshow, and I couldn't find a single baby photo where Mason looks like anyone from our family, or David's family for that matter." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What do you mean?" "I mean, usually you can see family resemblances pretty clearly in kids, right? Like how my Emma looks exactly like Dad did as a baby and Tyler is basically David's clone. But Mason... ... She trailed off, glancing at me nervously. "I'm sorry. That probably sounded awful. I didn't mean anything by it. No, it's okay. Other people have mentioned it too." Emma studied my face carefully. "Sarah, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept in weeks." And suddenly, sitting there in my kitchen with my sister, the one person in the world I could trust completely, everything came pouring out. All my observations, all my fears, all the strange family interactions and guilty glances. Emma listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished, reaching across to squeeze my hand, "this must be eating you alive. I feel like I'm going crazy. Like maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there because I'm looking too hard. But Emma, what if? What if David isn't Mason's father?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching Mason, who had moved on to playing with toy cars and was making elaborate crashing sounds. "Have you thought about getting a DNA test?" she asked gently. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Of course. DNA testing. It was so obvious, so simple, but somehow I'd been so caught up in analyzing features and family dynamics that the most straightforward solution had uneven occurred to me. I don't know if I could handle the results," I admitted. "Don't." "But can you handle not knowing?" "Sarah, you're torturing yourself. You deserve to know the truth, whatever it is." That night, after David fell asleep, I sat in Mason's nursery, watching him sleep in the dim glow of his nightlight. He was so beautiful, so innocent, completely unaware that his mother was having a breakdown over his parentage. Whatever the truth was, he was still my baby. It would never change. But I needed to know. For my sanity, for my marriage, for my ability to move forward in any direction, I needed to know. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent hours researching DNA testing online. There were so many options: paternity tests, genealogy tests, legal versus non-legal testing. My head was spinning with information about cheek swabs and blood draws and chain of custody procedures. I settled on a simple, confidential paternity test that I could order online. It would test Mason and David and give me a definitive answer about whether David was the biological father. The kit would arrive in discreet packaging, and I could collect the samples myself and mail them back to the lab. But as I sat there with my credit card in hand, ready to place the order, I realized I had another decision to make. What if David wasn't the father? But then, and more importantly, if David wasn't the father, who was? Deep down, I already knew the answer to that question. The signs pointed to Jake. The resemblance, the timing, the way the family had been acting. If I was going to do this test, I needed to test both David and Jake to know the complete truth. The thought of secretly collecting DNA samples from my brother-in-law felt like crossing a line into some kind of spy thriller territory. But what choice did I have? I couldn't just ask Jake outright. Not yet. Not until I knew for sure. I ordered 2 paternity tests. One for David and Mason. One for Jake and Mason. My hands were shaking as I entered my credit card information and delivery address. There was no going back after this. In 2 weeks, I would have answers that would either reassure me that I'd been paranoid and imagining things, or confirm my worst fears and destroy my marriage. The next few days passed in a strange fog. I went through the motions of normal life. Cooking dinner, playing with Mason, making small talk with David about his work projects. But inside, I was counting down the days until the test kits arrived. When the packages finally came, innocuously labeled and mixed in with regular mail, my heart was pounding so hard I thought David might hear it from the next room. I hid the kits in my dresser drawer, underneath old sweaters, and waited for the right opportunity. That opportunity came the following Saturday morning. David was doing yard work, and Jake had stopped by to help move some furniture. As I made sandwiches for lunch, I watched them through the kitchen window. My husband and his brother, working together, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear. In a few hours, I would have their DNA samples. And in 2 weeks, I would know which one of them was my son's father. Collecting the DNA samples was surprisingly easy, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more surreal. David's sample came from his toothbrush, a simple swab of the bristles according to the kit instructions. Jake's came from a water bottle he left behind after helping with the furniture, and I managed to get a good sample from the rim where his lips had been. Mason's samples were the hardest emotionally. I had to swab the inside of his cheek while he was sleeping, feeling like the worst mother in the world for subjecting my innocent 2-year-old to my paranoid investigation. But he didn't wake up, and I told myself that whatever the results showed, I was doing this for his benefit too. He deserved to know who his real father was. I mailed both test kits on the same day using different post offices across town to avoid any possibility of the packages being mixed up. The lab promised results in 10 to 14 business days. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I became obsessed with checking the testing company's website, logging into my account multiple times a day to see if the results were ready. David commented that I seemed distracted, and I blamed it on work stress and some fictional project deadline. Jake stopped by a few times during those 2 weeks. I found myself studying his interactions with Mason with new intensity, looking for any sign that he suspected what I was doing. The results became available on a Thursday afternoon. I was at work, sitting in a conference room during a particularly boring marketing meeting, when my phone buzzed with an email notification. Your DNA test results are now available. My heart stopped. I mumbled something about feeling sick and rushed to the bathroom, locking myself in a stall with shaking hands as I logged into the testing website on my phone. The first test, David and Mason, loaded first. Probability of paternity, 0%. The tested man is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The words blurred on my screen. I read them again and again. 0%. David was not Mason's father. I was hyperventilating, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were white. Part of me had been preparing for this possibility, but seeing it in black and white official language made it devastatingly real. My husband was not my son's biological father. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the second test results. Jake and Mason. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. The tested man cannot be excluded as the biological father of the tested child. Jake. Jake was Mason's father. I don't remember how long I sat in that bathroom stall, staring at those results. Time seemed to stop completely. My entire world had just imploded in the span of 2 mouse clicks. Jake, David's younger brother, my friend, person I'd trusted to be there for me during David's work trips, was my son's biological father. Which meant that at some point, something had happened between us that I couldn't remember. Wait, that couldn't be right. I would remember having sex with Jake. I would remember cheating on my husband, wouldn't I? But as I sat there, forcing myself to think back through the timeline, horrible possibilities began surfacing in my mind. There had been nights when Jake came over while David was traveling, nights when we'd had wine while watching movies. I remembered feeling relaxed, sometimes falling asleep on the couch, waking up the next morning fuzzy about how the evening had ended. Had Jake taken advantage of me during one of those nights? Had I been too drunk to remember? Or worse, had I been a willing participant in betraying my husband and somehow blocked out the memory? The bathroom walls felt like they were closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled out of the stall and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, someone whose entire life was built on a lie. I somehow made it through the rest of the workday on autopilot, claiming I had food poisoning when my coworkers asked about my pale complexion. I drove home in a daze, the printed DNA results folded in my purse like a ticking time bomb. David was already home when I arrived, playing with Mason in the living room. The sight of them together, my husband lovingly interacting with a child who wasn't biologically his, was completely unaware that his world was about to crumble too, almost broke me. "How was your day?" David asked, looking up with a smile as Mason climbed all over him. "Fine," I managed, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. Mason ran over to hug my legs, and I picked him up, holding him tighter than usual. He giggled and squirmed, trying to get down to return to his toys. As I looked at his beautiful face, Jake's face, I felt a confusing mixture of love, grief, and betrayal that I didn't know how to process. "Mommy's sad?" Mason asked, his 2-year-old intuition picking up on my distress. "No, baby, Mommy's just tired," I lied, kissing his forehead. David was watching us with a slight frown. "You sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost?" A ghost. That was exactly what I felt like. Like the person I'd been that morning no longer existed. That Sarah had been living in an innocent world where her biggest problems were work deadlines and what to make for dinner. This new Sarah was living in a nightmare where nothing was what it seemed. "I need to tell you something," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "After Mason goes to bed." Something in my tone must have alarmed David because his expression immediately grew serious. "Sarah, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I looked at my husband, this good man who had been nothing but loving and faithful, who had no idea that his brother had betrayed him in the worst possible way, who had been raising another man's child for over 2 years without knowing it. "Just, let's get Mason ready for bed first. Then we need to talk." That evening felt like the longest of my life. We went through Mason's bedtime routine in tense silence. Bath time, story time, tucking him into his crib. David kept shooting me worried glances, clearly sensing that something major was wrong. But I couldn't find the words to begin this conversation. How do you tell your husband that your son isn't his? How do you explain that his own brother is the biological father? How do you admit that you don't even remember how it happened? Once Mason's bedroom door was closed, and we could hear his soft breathing through the monitor, David and I sat across from each other at our kitchen table. The DNA test results felt like they were burning a hole through my purse. "Okay," David said, reaching across to take my hands. "Talk to me, what's going on?" I pulled my hands away and reached for the papers. There was no gentle way to do this, no way to soften the blow. I placed both test results on the table between us. "I had DNA tests done," I said quietly. "On Mason." David's face went completely white. "What, ... Why would you?" Sarah, what the hell is this? I needed to know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Too many people have been saying he doesn't look like us. Your family has been acting strange. I needed to know the truth. David grabbed the first paper, his test results. I watched his face as he read, watched the exact moment when the words sank in. The color drained from his face completely. 0%, he read aloud, his voice hollow. I'm not. Mason isn't. No, I confirmed. You're not his biological father. David stared at the paper for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of devastation, anger, and complete bewilderment. How is this possible, Sarah? How is this fucking possible? I slid the second test across the table. Because of this. David picked up Jake's results, and I watched as confusion gave way to horrified understanding. Jake, his voice cracked on his brother's name. Jake is ... My brother is Mason's father. I nodded, tears finally starting to fall. According to the DNA, yes. David stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. This can't be real. This cannot be fucking real. He was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. When did this happen? How long have you been cheating on me with my own brother? I don't know, I said, and the truth of that statement hit me all over again. David, I swear to God I don't remember anything happening between Jake and me. I would never. I love you. I would never betray you like that. But you did, David shouted, then immediately lowered his voice, glancing toward Mason's room. The DNA doesn't lie, Sarah. You had sex with my brother. You got pregnant with his baby. And you've been lying to me for over 2 years. I haven't been lying. I stood up too, desperate for him to understand. I genuinely thought Mason was your son. I had no idea. Then how do you explain this? David waved the papers at me. Immaculate conception. I tried to think back through the timeline around Mason's conception. There were those nights when Jake would come over while you were traveling, would have wine, watch movies. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on the couch and wake up the next morning not remembering much about the end of the evening. David's expression shifted from anger to something closer to horror. Are you saying that he took advantage of you? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe I was a willing participant, and I've blocked it out because of guilt. David, I honestly don't know what happened, but I need you to believe that I never intentionally betrayed you. David sank back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. This is insane. This is absolutely insane, my brother. And my little brother. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us trying to process the magnitude of what this meant for our family, our marriage, everything we'd built together. We need to confront Jake, David finally said, his voice deadly quiet. David, maybe we should think about this first. Plan what we're going to say, double quotes, no. David stood up again, grabbing his car keys from the counter. I'm going over there right now. I need to hear from him what happened. I'm coming with you. Sarah, no. This is between me and my brother. This is my son we're talking about, I said firmly. I'm coming. The drive to Jake's apartment was silent except for David's heavy breathing. I could practically feel the rage radiating off of him. Jake lived in a small one-bedroom place about 15 minutes away, a complex that catered to young professionals and college graduates. David pounded on Jake's door with such force that I was surprised it didn't break. After a moment, we heard footsteps and Jake's voice through the door. Who is it? It's David. Open up. Now, the door opened, and Jake appeared in sweatpants and a t-shirt, clearly ready for bed. His face lit up when he saw us, then immediately fell when he registered our expressions. Hey guys, is everything okay? Is Mason all right? David pushed past Jake into the apartment, and I followed. Jake closed the door behind us, looking confused and increasingly worried. Sit down, David ordered. David, you're scaring me. What's going on? Sit down. Jake sat on his couch and David threw the DNA test results at him. Explain these. Jake picked up the papers, and I watched his face as he read. Unlike David's shock, Jake's expression showed something different. Recognition, guilt, like he'd been dreading this moment for years. Oh God, Jake whispered, his hands shaking as he held the papers. Oh God, David, You knew, David said, his voice dangerously quiet. You fucking knew. Jake looked up at both of us with tears in his eyes. I can explain. Those 3 words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake's admission that he could explain meant he remembered what I couldn't. It meant this wasn't some drunken mistake that we'd both forgotten. It meant he had been living with this secret, watching me raise his son, watching David love a child who wasn't his, and saying nothing. What Jake told us that night changed everything I thought I knew about betrayal, family, and forgiveness. It happened during one of David's longest work trips. 3 weeks in Colorado, overseeing a major project. I was about 6 months pregnant at the time, but we'd been trying for so long that I'd miscarried earlier that year, and I was terrified of losing another baby. I was anxious, emotional, and incredibly lonely. Jake had been coming over regularly to check on me, which both David and I appreciated. But on this particular night, I'd been having cramping and was convinced something was wrong with the pregnancy. Jake found me crying on the bathroom floor, terrified I was miscarrying again. "I held you while you cried," Jake said, unable to look at either of us as he spoke. "You were so scared, and I just wanted to comfort you." But somewhere in that moment, something shifted. The way you looked at me, the way you held on to me, ... It felt like more than just comfort. According to Jake, we'd both been sober that night. There was no alcohol involved, no impaired judgment that could serve as an excuse. We were 2 adults who made a conscious choice to cross a line that should never have been crossed. "It only happened once," Jake said, his voice barely audible. "It's just that one night." And immediately afterward, we both knew it was a mistake. "Sarah, you were crying, saying you couldn't believe what we'd done, that you loved David and this could never happen again." We agreed to never speak of it, to pretend it never happened. But I didn't remember any of this. Not the cramping, not the fear, not the comfort that turned into something else. Not the sex, not the conversation afterward. It was like Jake was describing something that had happened to a different person. "How can I not remember this?" I asked, feeling like I was losing my mind. Jake looked at me with profound sadness. "You were so overwhelmed with guilt that you made yourself forget. Even the next morning, you acted like nothing had happened. I thought maybe you were just pretending, trying to protect your marriage. But as weeks went by, it became clear that you genuinely blocked it out." David had been silent during Jake's confession, but I could see his hands clenching and unclenching, his jaw working as he processed his brother's betrayal. "When Mason was born," Jake continued, "and he looked so much like me, I knew he was mine. But Sarah genuinely didn't seem to know, and David was so happy, and I thought maybe it was better this way. Maybe Mason was better off with David as his father. That wasn't your decision to make?" David finally spoke, his voice deadly quiet. "That wasn't your fucking decision to make." The confrontation that followed was devastating. 2 years of suppressed guilt and 3 years of lies came pouring out in accusations, tears, and words that could never be taken back. David felt betrayed not just by his wife, but by his younger brother, the person he'd protected and supported their entire lives. I felt violated by my own mind's refusal to let me remember something so significant. But the most heartbreaking part was realizing that Mason, innocent, beautiful Mason, was caught in the middle of this adult catastrophe. The next few months were the darkest period of my life. David moved out temporarily while we tried to figure out if our marriage could survive this betrayal. Jake was cut off completely from the family. David refused to see or speak to him. Their parents were devastated when they learned the truth. I started therapy to try to understand how I could have completely blocked out such a significant event. My therapist explained that traumatic blocking of memories isn't uncommon, especially when the memories conflict with our core sense of identity and values. My mind had protected itself from the guilt and shame by refusing to retain the memory of cheating on my husband. The hardest part was looking at Mason every day and seeing Jake's features while trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Mason kept asking why Uncle Jake didn't visit anymore, why Daddy was living in a different house, why Mommy cried so much. David and I went to couples therapy, individual therapy, and had countless late-night conversations about whether our marriage could survive this. The trust was shattered.